After my husband left me for his lover, I blocked his access to our finances. He never saw it coming. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But mine arrived with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel and the finality of a judge's gavel. For 15 years, I'd been the devoted wife, the understanding partner, the woman who put everyone else's needs before her own. I'd watched my husband climb the corporate ladder using the financial foundation I'd helped build, never once imagining that the hands I held each night would one day reach for someone else. But life has a cruel way of teaching us that trust can be weaponized, and love can be the most dangerous vulnerability of all. The afternoon I discovered my husband's affair, something inside me didn't break. It crystallized into diamond-hard resolve. While he was making promises to her in some hotel room, I was making moves that would change everything. This isn't a story about a woman scorned. It's about a woman who finally opened her eyes and realized she'd been holding all the cards the entire time. If you've ever felt invisible, taken for granted, or wondered what it would feel like to reclaim your power in one decisive moment, then this story is for you. Subscribe now, because what happened next will make you question everything you thought you knew about marriage, money, and the quiet strength that lies dormant in people who've been pushed just one step too far. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday, which in retrospect felt fitting. Tuesdays had always been unremarkable days, the kind that blur into the fabric of ordinary life, without leaving any particular impression. I remember standing in our kitchen, sunlight streaming through the windows onto the marble countertops. We'd chosen together 5 years ago, holding a cream-colored piece of paper that would unravel everything. I thought I knew about my marriage. It wasn't the affair that shocked me, not really. Deep down, in that place where we store truths too painful to examine in daylight, I'd known something was wrong for months, maybe even longer. It was the way Michael had started smiling at his phone. When he thought I wasn't looking, those secretive little grins that never quite reached his eyes anymore when he looked at me. It was the late nights at the office that multiplied like rabbits, the business trips that seemed to stretch longer and longer, the way he'd started buying cologne. I'd never smelled on him at home. The envelope was from a private investigator I hadn't hired. That detail still makes me shiver. It came from Angela, my best friend since college, who'd apparently noticed what I'd been too trusting or too terrified to investigate. Myself. Inside were photographs. Not the kind you'd put in a wedding album. Michael with her at a restaurant. I'd mentioned wanting to try for our anniversary. Michael with her at the theater. Watching the show I'd begged him to see with me for months. Michael with her entering what the attached report identified as a luxury apartment he'd been renting for the past 7 months. 7 months. Not a mistake. Not a moment of weakness. 7 months of premeditation, of lies stacked upon lies, of a double life so elaborate it would have been impressive if it weren't so devastating. Her name was Simone. She was 32, 8 years younger than me, a marketing executive at a rival firm. She was beautiful in that effortless way some women are, with long dark hair and the kind of figure that came from having a personal trainer, rather than from chasing 2 kids around while trying to work from home. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Photographs spread across the kitchen island like a gruesome hand of cards. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of leaf blowers somewhere in the neighborhood. Our children, Emma, 12, and Jack, 9, were at school. Michael was at work, or at least that's where he'd said he'd be. For all I knew, he was with her. The strangest thing happened in that moment of absolute betrayal. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't feel the floor drop out from under me the way I'd always imagined I would if something like this happened. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Absolutely crystal clear clarity. It was as if every decision I'd made in the past 15 years suddenly came into focus, and I could see the patterns I'd been too close to recognize. I'd been so busy being the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect partner in our perfect life, that I'd forgotten to protect myself. You see, I came into our marriage with assets. Not insignificant ones either. My grandfather had left me a trust fund when I died. Nothing extravagant by billionaire standards, but enough to make a real difference. $300,000 that I'd invested carefully in my 20s. watching it grow. Then, there was the small tech company I'd founded fresh out of business school, a content management system that I'd eventually sold for $1.2 million 6 months before Michael and I got engaged. Michael had been charming about it, in the way that men who are threatened by successful women often are. He'd praised my business acumen while simultaneously suggesting that maybe, with marriage and children on the horizon, it would be wise to pool our resources. "We're a team now," he'd said, holding my hands across the candlelit table where he'd proposed. "What's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine." That's what marriage means. I'd been young enough and in love, enough to believe that combining everything was romantic rather than risky. We'd opened joint accounts, put both our names on everything, intertwined our financial lives so completely that it had felt like becoming one person. His career had taken off. He'd climbed from middle management to VP of operations at a major manufacturing firm, and his six-figure salary had seemed like our money. My decision to step back from my career to raise our children had seemed like our choice. The house we'd bought, the investments we'd made, the life we'd built. It had all seemed like ours. But sitting there with evidence of his betrayal spread before me, I realized something crucial. While emotionally I'd given him everything, legally I'd maintained more control than I'd remembered. Years ago, at my lawyer's insistence during the estate planning after Jack was born, I'd kept certain accounts in my name only. The original trust fund money, though grown substantially, remained mine. Some of the stock investments from my company sale had been kept separate on advice from my financial advisor, who'd warned me about the importance of maintaining individual credit and assets even in marriage. At the time, I'd felt almost guilty about it, as if keeping something separate was a betrayal of the "what's mine is yours" philosophy Michael had championed. But my advisors had been insistent, and I'd been too busy with a newborn and a toddler to argue. So I'd signed where they told me to sign, maintained separate accounts I rarely thought about, and went on building our life together. Now, standing in our kitchen with my heart rate surprisingly steady, I realized that unconscious decision had left me with something Michael didn't know I had: leverage. I carefully gathered the photographs and slid them back into the envelope. Then I did something that felt simultaneously impulsive and inevitable. I called my lawyer. Not the family lawyer we used for estate planning, but my lawyer, the one who'd handled the sale of my company and had been managing my separate assets all these years. "Elizabeth," I said when her assistant put me through, my voice calm in a way that surprised me. "I need to see you today. It's about my marriage and it's urgent." The meeting in Elizabeth's downtown office felt surreal, like watching myself in a movie. She reviewed the documentation from the private investigator, made notes in her precise handwriting, and then pulled up files I'd almost forgotten existed. Account statements, investment portfolios, property deeds. As she walked me through everything, I felt like I was seeing my own life from the outside for the first time. "The house is in both your names," Elizabeth said, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed documents on her computer screen. "But you provided the entire down payment from your premarital assets." "We documented that carefully. The investment properties you've acquired over the years, the rental condo downtown and the vacation property in Colorado, those are both in your name only, purchased with funds from your separate accounts." I'd forgotten about those decisions. Michael had been dismissive of real estate investment, calling it too much hassle. So I'd quietly used my own money to purchase properties that had appreciated significantly over the past decade. "The joint accounts," Elizabeth continued, "those are obviously accessible to both of you. But the brokerage accounts in your name, the trust fund account, and the money market account we set up, those are yours alone. He has no legal claim to them, and more importantly, he can't access them without your permission." "What about his accounts?" I asked. Elizabeth pulled up another file. Checking and savings in his name only. Not much there, maybe 30,000. He's got a 401k through his employer, which would be considered marital property in a divorce. The joint accounts have about 200,000 between checking, savings, and the money market. I did the math in my head. Michael had access to roughly $230,000 that he could access on his own. I had control of over $2.8 million in separate accounts, plus shared access to the joint accounts, plus the equity in the properties in my name alone. He doesn't know about most of your separate accounts, does he? Elizabeth asked, watching my face. We never talk about them, I admitted. I check the statements when they come, but it's been on autopilot for years. He knows I had money before we married, but I don't think he realizes how much it's grown, or that it's still completely separate. Elizabeth leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers. Laura, I need to be clear with you about something. If you're considering divorce, California is a community property state. Assets acquired during the marriage are generally split 50-50. However, assets that were yours before the marriage and have been kept completely separate, those remain yours. The growth on those separate assets is a gray area we'd have to argue, but the principle is sound. What are my immediate options? I asked. Not divorce yet. I'm not ready for that decision. But protection. What can I do to protect myself right now? Elizabeth smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a woman who'd helped a lot of other women through this exact situation. Legally, you can revoke his access to any accounts that are in your name only. You can move money from joint accounts to separate accounts, though I'd advise caution there, as you don't want to be accused of hiding marital assets. What you can do is secure what's already yours and ensure he can't dissipate marital assets while you're figuring out your next move. We spent the next 2 hours creating what Elizabeth called a financial protection plan. She drafted letters to banks and investment firms, revoking any secondary access Michael might have had to my separate accounts. We reviewed the joint accounts and decided I would transfer exactly half to a new account in my name only, protecting my interest without overreaching. We documented everything meticulously, creating a paper trail that would protect me if this ended up in court. By the time I left Elizabeth's office, it was mid-afternoon. Michael would be home in a few hours, probably with another excuse about why he was late. Another lie to add to the collection. I picked up the kids from school, helped Jack with his math homework, listened to Emma talk about drama with her friend group, made dinner, chicken parmesan, one of Michael's favorites, which suddenly felt like an absurd detail. Why was I still making his favorite meals? He came home at 7:30, loosening his tie as he walked through the door. Sorry I'm late, he said, kissing my cheek with practiced ease. The Henderson meeting ran long. I almost laughed. The Henderson meeting. Such a specific lie, complete with a name I could verify if I wanted to. But I didn't want to. I didn't need to. I knew the truth, and he didn't know I knew. And that knowledge sat in my chest like a secret weapon. How was your day? He asked, grabbing a beer from the refrigerator. Productive, I said, and it wasn't a lie. That night, after the kids were in bed, after Michael had fallen asleep with the television on, like he always did, I sat in my home office and executed the plan Elizabeth and I had created. Click by click, I secured my financial independence. I changed passwords. I revoked access. I transferred funds. By midnight, Michael's ability to touch my premarital assets had been completely eliminated. He could still access the joint accounts, but only the joint accounts. Everything that was mine remained mine, protected behind passwords only I knew. The strangest part was how methodical it felt. There was no dramatic music, no moment of vengeful triumph, just me in my pajamas, drinking chamomile tea and systematically protecting myself from the man I'd loved for 15 years. The man who was snoring softly in our bed, probably dreaming about her. I allowed myself one moment of emotion that night. After everything was done, after every account was secured, I sat back in my chair and let myself cry. Not hysterical sobs, but quiet tears for the marriage I'd thought I had, for the man I'd thought he was, for the 15 years I'd invested in a partnership that had apparently been one-sided. I cried for the fact that I had to protect myself from someone who'd promised to love and cherish me. And then I dried my eyes, closed my laptop, and went to bed. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't announce itself all at once. It unfolds in layers, each revelation more painful than the last. Over the next 2 weeks, I became someone I'd never imagined I could be. Suspicious, vigilant, strategic. I checked our phone bills and found hundreds of texts to her number. I monitored our credit cards and saw charges for jewelry I'd never received. Dinners at restaurants we'd never visited together. Hotel rooms in cities he'd supposedly traveled to, alone for business. I hired my own private investigator, not to confirm what I already knew, but to document it thoroughly. In case of divorce, Angela had advised, California might be no fault, but having evidence could help in other ways. Custody decisions, spousal support negotiations, the court of public opinion. Michael continued his double life, apparently confident in his deception. He'd come home and ask about my day, help Jack with his science project, watch TV with Emma, make love to me with what seemed like genuine affection. It was the making love part that nearly broke me. How could he touch me, be intimate with me, look into my eyes, when he was sleeping with someone else? How could he compartmentalize so completely? But I was learning to compartmentalize too. During the day, I was Laura Thompson, devoted wife and mother, running errands and attending PTA meetings. At night, after everyone slept, I was someone else entirely, a woman preparing for war. I met with Elizabeth twice more, reviewing California divorce law, discussing strategies, preparing for possibilities. I opened a separate bank account at a different institution and moved half of our joint savings. There, my half. Legally speaking, though Michael didn't know it existed, I also did something that surprised even me. I started looking at my own career with fresh eyes. For 12 years, I'd been a stay-at-home mother, telling myself it was what our family needed. But the kids were older now, more independent. And sitting there with evidence of my husband's affair, I realized I'd made myself financially vulnerable by stepping away from my career. Yes, I had my separate assets, but I had no current income of my own. In a divorce, that would make me dependent on spousal support. I hated that idea with a passion I hadn't known I possessed. So I reached out to old colleagues, updated my LinkedIn profile, started having coffee meetings with people in my industry. The tech world had changed dramatically since I'd sold my company, but the skills I'd developed, project management, systems thinking, leadership, those were still valuable. Within a week, I had 2 serious offers, a consulting position that would let me work from home and a director-level position at a mid-sized software company. Both paid well. Both would give me independence. 3 weeks after receiving that envelope from Angela, I was sitting at dinner with my family when Michael's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and I saw something flicker across his face, pleasure mixed with guilt. He excused himself, saying it was work, and stepped out to the backyard to take the call. Through the kitchen window, I watched him pace, smiling. His whole body language transformed. He was talking to her, I knew. Right there, 20 feet from his children, from his wife, from the life he was systematically betraying. Emma noticed me watching. "Mom, you okay?" I turned to her, my beautiful daughter who looked so much like me, and made a decision. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Actually, I'm better than fine. I have some news." Both kids looked at me expectantly. "I've accepted a new job. I'm going back to work." Jack's face lit up. "Really? Doing what?" "I'll be a director at a software company. It means I'll be out of the house more during the day, but I'll still be here for you guys. Grandma said she'd help with pickups when I can't make it." Emma smiled. "That's cool, Mom. You've seemed kind of, I don't know, bored lately?" "This is good." Bored. My daughter had noticed what I hadn't wanted to admit. I'd been bored, unfulfilled, lost in the routine of maintaining a household, while my sense of self slowly evaporated. When had I stopped being Laura, the entrepreneur, the businesswoman, the woman with her own ambitions? When had I become just Michael's wife, Emma and Jack's mom, the person who existed to support everyone else's dreams? Michael came back inside, sliding his phone into his pocket. "What did I miss?" "Mom's got a job," Jack announced. "She's going to be a director at a software company." Something crossed Michael's face. Surprise, maybe concern. "When did this happen?" "Over the past few weeks," I said. meeting his eyes steadily. "I've been doing interviews. The offer came through this afternoon. We should talk about this," he said, and I heard the subtle attempt at control. "That's a big decision for our family." "I've made the decision," I said calmly. "I start in 2 weeks." For just a moment I saw irritation flash in his eyes. He wasn't used to me making unilateral decisions about my own life. We'd always discussed everything. Or at least I'd always asked his opinion before doing anything significant. But I wasn't that woman anymore. That woman had died the day I opened an envelope and saw her husband's secret life, spread out in glossy photographs. That night, after the kids were asleep, Michael tried to initiate a conversation about my job. "Don't you think we should have discussed this? What about your time with the kids? What about—" "What about what, Michael?" I interrupted, and my voice was sharper than I'd intended. "What about the fact that I've put my career on hold for 12 years? What about the fact that our children are old enough not to need me home every second? Or what about the fact that you might not like me having financial independence?" He looked genuinely taken aback. "That's not fair. I've always supported your choices." "Have you?" I asked. "Or have you supported the choices that made your life easier?" We stared at each other, and I saw him recalibrate, sliding back into the charming, understanding husband role he played so well. "You're right," he said, stepping closer and putting his hands on my shoulders. "I'm sorry. I'm being selfish. I just worry about you taking on too much. But if this is what you want, I support you completely." Liar, I thought, even as I let him pull me into a hug. "You don't support me. You don't even see me. You're too busy building a life with her to notice that. I'm building a life without you." The next morning, something shifted. Maybe it was the job offer giving me confidence, or maybe it was just the accumulated weight of weeks of secret knowledge. But I decided I was done pretending. Not done with the marriage. I hadn't made that decision yet, though it seemed increasingly inevitable. But done pretending I didn't know. Done performing the role of the oblivious wife. I waited until Michael left for work, until the kids were at school, and then I called Angela. "I need you to meet me for lunch. And bring wine. I have a story to tell you." Over salads at a cafe downtown, I laid out everything. The photographs she'd sent, the subsequent investigation, the financial moves I'd made, the job I'd accepted. Angela listened with the righteous fury of a best friend, her expression cycling through shock, anger, and finally, fierce pride. "You've been protecting yourself," she said. "Good. But Laura, when are you going to confront him?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to keep this going, see how long he'll lie to my face. Part of me wants to scream at him until my voice gives out. And part of me just wants to disappear, start over, and let him figure it out on his own." "What do you want most?" Angela asked. I thought about it, really thought about it. What did I want? Not revenge, exactly, though the idea had its appeal. Not reconciliation. I couldn't imagine ever trusting him again. And without trust, what was the point? What I wanted, I realized, was acknowledgement. I wanted him to understand what he'd done, what he'd destroyed. I wanted him to see me clearly for perhaps the first time in years. And I wanted to make decisions about my future from a position of strength, not desperation. "I want him to realize he's lost something valuable," I finally said. "I want him to understand that I'm not just going to fade away quietly. And I want my kids to see their mother as someone strong, someone who doesn't accept being treated badly." Angela reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Then make him see it." The opportunity came sooner than I expected. That Friday night, Michael announced he had another business trip. Houston. 3 days. Some crisis with a major client. I nodded, said all the appropriate supportive wife things, and watched him pack his bag. He kissed me goodbye, told the kids he loved them, and climbed into an Uber headed for the airport. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from my private investigator. He didn't go to the airport. Heading to the apartment downtown. "Want me to follow?" I texted back. "No, I know where he is. Send me the address again." I spent that evening creating normalcy for Emma and Jack. Homework help, dinner, a movie, while my mind worked through possibilities. By the time I'd tucked them both into bed, I'd made a decision. I called my mother, who lived 30 minutes away, and asked if she could come stay with the kids tomorrow. I have something I need to do, I told her. That night I barely slept. I lay in our bed, my bed now, really, since he'd chosen to be elsewhere, and thought about 15 years of marriage. The good times had been genuinely good. Lazy Sunday mornings, inside jokes, the overwhelming joy of holding our babies for the first time. Vacations where we'd laughed until we cried. But mixed with those memories were other, less pleasant ones that I'd minimized or ignored. The way he'd dismissed my opinions in front of his colleagues. The times he'd made me feel foolish for having emotional reactions to things. The gradual erosion of my confidence as I'd molded myself into the wife he seemed to want. Had I been happy, or had I been comfortable? There's a difference, I'd come to realize. Comfort can feel like happiness if you stop examining it too closely. Saturday morning arrived cool and cloudy, the kind of day that feels suspended between seasons. My mother arrived promptly, took one look at my face, and pulled me into a hug. "Whatever you're doing," she whispered, "I'm proud of you." I drove downtown in a daze of adrenaline and certainty, parked in front of the luxury apartment building my investigator had identified as Simone's residence, and sat in my car for 10 minutes, gathering my courage. Not courage to confront them. I had plenty of that. Courage to see it, to make it real. To step fully into this new reality where my marriage was truly over. Finally, I got out of the car and walked into the building. The doorman smiled politely. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to see Simone Keller," I said, amazed at how steady my voice sounded. "I'm her." I paused, considering. "I'm someone she needs to speak with. It's urgent. Is she expecting you?" "No," I said. "But she'll want to see me. Tell her Laura Thompson is here." Michael's wife. The doorman's professional demeanor cracked slightly. He knew exactly who Michael was, which told me everything I needed to know about how often my husband visited this building. He picked up the phone, had a whispered conversation, and then nodded toward the elevator. 10th floor, apartment 1014. I rode the elevator up, watching the numbers climb, feeling remarkably calm. The doors opened, and I walked down a hallway with artwork on the walls, past doors that probably hid other people's secrets, until I reached 1014. Before I could knock, the door opened. Simone was even more beautiful in person than in the photographs, wearing jeans and an oversized sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked young and scared and defiant all at once. Behind her, in the open-concept living space, I could see Michael frozen on the couch, his face drained of color. "I'm not here to make a scene," I said, looking directly at Simone. "I just want to have a conversation. May I come in?" She stepped aside, and I walked into my husband's secret life. The apartment was beautifully decorated, modern and clean, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the city. There were photographs on the shelves, her photographs, her memories, but also ones that included him. Michael at the beach, Michael laughing at some restaurant, Michael existing in a whole separate reality that had nothing to do with me. He stood up from the couch, started to speak. "Laura, Don't," I said, holding up my hand. "Don't say whatever you were about to say. Don't tell me it's not what it looks like, or that you can explain. We're past that now." I turned to Simone, who was standing near the kitchen island, her arms wrapped around herself. "How long have you known he was married?" She swallowed hard. "From the beginning. He told me his marriage was over, that you were staying together for the kids, but that you were essentially just roommates." I actually laughed at that. "Is that what he said? We're roommates who sleep together, who go to marriage counseling. Oh, wait, that's something I wanted to do that he said we didn't need. We're roommates who planned a vacation to Hawaii next month, whose children think their parents are happily married." Simone's eyes widened, and she looked at Michael. "Hawaii, you said?" "He says a lot of things," I interrupted. "That's something you'll learn about him, Simone. He's very good at saying whatever people want to hear." I finally looked at Michael fully, and was gratified to see genuine fear in his eyes. Good. He should be afraid. "How long?" I asked him. "And please, for once in our marriage, tell me the truth." 8 months, he said quietly. 8 months, I repeated. Not 7, like I thought. 8. That's interesting math, Michael. 8 months ago was our anniversary. The weekend we left the kids, with my mom, and went to that bed and breakfast in wine country. The weekend you told me you'd never loved me more. So when did she start? Before that weekend? During? Right after? Laura, please, answer the question. Before, he admitted, and at least he had the grace to look ashamed. It had already started. I don't know why, it happened. And then I couldn't stop it. You couldn't stop it, I said flatly. Like it was weather. Like it was something that happened to you instead of choices you made. Every single day for 8 months. I turned back to Simone. Did you love him? The question seemed to catch her off guard. Yes, I do. Did he tell you he loved you? Yes. Do you believe him? She hesitated, and in that hesitation I saw doubt. Good. She should doubt him. I doubted him, and I'd known him 15 years longer. I thought I did, she said finally. I nodded, feeling oddly compassionate toward this woman who'd been sleeping with my husband. She was a symptom, not the disease. The disease was Michael's selfishness, his inability to be honest, his willingness to destroy what we'd built for the excitement of something new. Here's what's going to happen, I said, and my voice was steady, calm, the voice of someone who'd thought this through. Michael, I want you to stay here tonight. Don't come home. Tomorrow, you can come by the house at 1 o'clock, when the kids are at their friends' houses, and we'll talk about next steps. But you're not coming home today. Laura, you can't just kick me out of my own house. Our house, I corrected. And actually, I can. The down payment was entirely mine, from money I had before we married. Elizabeth confirmed it yesterday. So yes, I absolutely can tell you not to come home. I pulled an envelope from my purse. I'd come prepared, after all, and handed it to him. Inside is a letter from my attorney outlining what I've done to protect my separate assets. You'll find that your access to my premarital accounts has been revoked. You still have access to the joint accounts, of course. They're still joint. But everything that was mine before we married, and the growth on those assets, is protected now. The color drained from his face as he opened the envelope and scanned the letter. You can't! This is Laura! This is my money, too! We've been married 15 years. California is community property. Premarital assets that are kept separate remain separate, I said. Elizabeth was very clear about that. The money I came into the marriage with, the money I made from selling my company before we were engaged, that's mine. The properties I bought in my name with that money, those are mine. You'll get half of what we accumulated during the marriage, which is still substantial. But my foundation, the assets I built before I met you, those stay with me. I watched understanding dawn on his face. He'd known I had money, but like so many things in our marriage, we'd never discussed the details. He'd assumed, I realized, that everything had blended together over the years, that my premarital assets had somehow become ours. He'd been counting on them, perhaps, in the divorce he'd probably been planning. Or maybe he just hadn't thought about it at all, too focused on his new relationship to consider practical consequences. I'm taking the kids to my mother's tonight, I continued, so you can come home and pack some things. I want you out by tomorrow afternoon. We'll figure out a custody arrangement through lawyers. But for now, I think it's better if you're not in the house. You're turning the kids against me, he said. And there was desperation in his voice now. No, I said firmly. You did that yourself. I haven't told them anything yet. I wanted to give you the chance to be honest with them. We can do that together, or you can do it alone. But it's happening. Our children deserve to know the truth about why their parents' marriage is ending. Simone had been silent through this exchange, watching us like someone watching a car accident. Now she spoke, her voice small. I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't mean to ruin a family. I looked at her and felt something unexpected. Pity. You didn't ruin our family, Simone. He did. You were just the excuse he needed to do what he apparently wanted to do anyway. And honestly, I surprised myself with the next words. In a way, you did me a favor. I would have spent the rest of my life with someone who was capable of this level of deception. Now I have a chance to find something real, something honest. So thank you. With that, I turned and walked toward the door. Michael's voice followed me. Laura, wait, please. Can't we talk about this? Can't we try to fix this? I stopped at the door and looked back at him. This man I'd loved, who'd fathered my children, who'd been my partner for 15 years. And I felt, not nothing exactly, but something close to it. The intense emotion I'd expected, rage, grief, devastation, was simply absent. In its place was clarity and, strangely, relief. Michael, I said quietly, there's nothing left to fix. You broke this so thoroughly that all the apologies and counseling in the world couldn't put it back together. And here's the thing. I don't want to fix it anymore. I'm tired. I'm tired of being the one who smooths everything over, who makes excuses, who pretends not to notice when things are wrong. I'm just done. I left the apartment, took the elevator down, walked through the lobby past the doorman who wouldn't quite meet my eyes, and got into my car. Only then, sitting in the parking garage of my husband's mistress's apartment building, did I finally break down. But even the crying felt different than I'd expected. Not the devastated sobs of a shattered heart, but something closer to mourning the death of illusions. I was crying for the marriage I'd thought I had, the partnership I'd believed in, the future I'd envisioned that would now never exist. And underneath the grief, surprising me with its strength, was something else, anticipation. Fear, yes, about what came next, about raising kids through a divorce, about rebuilding my life, but also excitement. For the first time in years, maybe for the first time since I'd gotten married, I belonged completely to myself. My time, my choices, my future, they were mine. I drove to my mother's house, where Emma and Jack were playing in the backyard. I stood at the window watching them. These two perfect humans I'd made with someone who'd turned out to be a stranger. They deserved better than what was coming. The disruption, the divided holidays, the shuttle between two houses. But they also deserved better than watching their parents stay together in a hollow marriage. They deserved to see what it looked like to have integrity, to make hard choices, to rebuild after betrayal. Mom? Emma had come inside and was looking at me with concern. Are you okay? You look like you've been crying. I pulled her into a hug. This daughter who was becoming a young woman, who would navigate her own relationship someday, who was watching and learning from everything her parents did. Honey, Dad and I need to talk to you and your brother about something. Can you get Jack? Let's sit down together. When both kids were settled on my mother's couch, looking at me with worried eyes that were too perceptive for their ages, I took a deep breath and did the hardest thing I'd ever done. Your dad and I are going to separate, I said. And even though I'd rehearsed the words 100 times in my mind, they still felt like stones in my mouth. This isn't about you. You both need to know that. Absolutely nothing about this is your fault. Your dad and I both love you more than anything in the world, and that will never change. But sometimes adults make mistakes, and sometimes relationships change. And your dad and I have realized we can't be married anymore. Jack's face crumpled immediately. Is it because of Dad's friend? The lady with the dark hair? My heart stopped. What do you mean, sweetheart? I saw her picture on Dad's phone once, he said, tears starting to roll down his cheeks. When he was showing me a game, she was in his photos. I asked who she was, and he said she was just a friend from work. But he looked weird about it, like he was lying. Emma was staring at her brother, then at me, and I watched understanding dawn across her face. She was 12, old enough to put pieces together, and her expression shifted from confusion to hurt, to anger in the space of seconds. He cheated on you, she said, and it wasn't a question. I wanted to lie, to protect them from the ugliness of adult betrayal. But I'd already decided they deserved truth. Yes, I said simply. Your father has been seeing someone else. That's why we can't stay married. But I need you both to understand something important. This is between your dad and me. He's still your father. He still loves you. The relationship between parents and children, is different from the relationship between spouses. What happened between your dad and me doesn't change how much he loves you. Jack launched himself into my arms, sobbing, and Emma sat frozen, her jaw tight. My mother, who'd been standing in the doorway, came and sat beside Emma, putting an arm around her shoulders. "It's okay to be angry," my mother said softly. "It's okay to feel however you feel. There's no right or wrong way to react to this." "I hate him," Emma said, and her voice was cold in a way that frightened me. "I hate him for hurting you, for hurting us. How could he do this?" "He made a mistake," I said, even though the word mistake felt inadequate for 8 months of deliberate deception. A big one, but he's still your dad. And eventually, you might want to forgive him. You don't have to do it now, or even soon, but I don't want you carrying around hate. It'll hurt you more than it hurts him. We stayed at my mother's house that night. All of us piled into her guest room like refugees from our own life. Lay awake between my children, listening to them breathe, and wondered how Michael was explaining this to himself. Was he painting himself as the victim, trapped in an unhappy marriage? Was he promising Simone they could be together now? Or was he, perhaps for the first time, actually confronting what he'd done? Sunday afternoon arrived with the inevitability of a storm. My mother stayed with the kids while I drove home alone to meet Michael. He was already there, his car in the driveway, looking strange and out of place, like it didn't quite belong anymore. I found him in our bedroom, packing clothes into a suitcase, with the clumsy movements of someone who'd never really had to pack for himself. "The kids know," I said from the doorway. He looked up, his face haggard. He'd aged 10 years in the past 24 hours. "How did they take it?" "How do you think they took it?" "Their father destroyed their family. Jack's been crying on and off since yesterday. Emma says she hates you." I watched him flinch. "I tried to tell them you still love them, that this doesn't change your relationship with them. But Michael, they're not stupid. They understand betrayal, and they're going to need time to process this." "I never wanted to hurt them," he said, and he actually sounded sincere. "Then you shouldn't have had an affair," I said flatly. "You don't get to avoid hurting them. You did this. Now you have to live with the consequences." I sat down on the edge of the bed we'd shared for 15 years, suddenly exhausted. "We need to figure out the practical details. Custody, finances, how we're going to tell people." He sat down on the opposite side of the bed, the suitcase between us, like a physical manifestation of everything that now separated us. "I want joint custody, 50-50. "That's not happening," I said immediately. "Not at first. The kids need stability, and their home is here with me. You can have them every other weekend and one evening during the week. When everyone's adjusted, when you've proven you can be reliable, we can discuss expanding your time." "That's not fair." "Fair?" I interrupted, and for the first time since entering the house, I let my anger show. "You want to talk about fair? Was it fair that you spent 8 months lying to my face? Was it fair that you spent our money, my money, on hotel rooms and gifts for another woman? Was it fair that you exposed me to God knows what health risks because you couldn't keep your marriage vows? Don't you dare talk to me about fair." He was quiet for a long moment. "What about the house?" "The house stays with me and the kids. You can take your clothes, your personal items, your office equipment. Everything else stays. Elizabeth is drawing up a complete asset division. But the short version is this. You get half of what we accumulated during the marriage. The joint accounts will be split. Your 401k is yours. My premarital assets and their growth stay with me, along with the properties I purchased in my name. The house will probably have to be sold eventually, but not until the kids are more settled." "I don't have anywhere to go," he said, and there was a pathetic quality to his voice that made me want to scream. "You have Simone's apartment," I said coldly. "Or you can get your own place. That's not my problem anymore, Michael. You made your choice. Live with it." We spent the next hour going through details, with the efficiency of strangers, who would tell which friends, how we'd handle school communications, what the schedule would look like for the next month. It was surreal. Dismantling 15 Years of partnership with the emotional engagement of negotiating. A business contract. But maybe that's what marriage becomes when trust dies. Just another transaction to be managed and concluded. Before he left, he tried one more time. Laura, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but is there any chance, any possibility that you might forgive me someday? That we could try to work through this? I looked at him, really looked at him, and tried to find any remaining trace of love in my heart. There was history there, shared experiences, the bond of co-parenting. There was even, surprisingly, a kind of fondness for who we'd been when we were young and everything. Had seemed possible. But love, the kind of love that could survive this? No, that was gone, burned away by 8 months of lies. No, I said simply. Even if I could forgive you, and I'm not sure I can, I could never trust you again. And without trust, we don't have anything worth saving. You killed this marriage, Michael. It's dead. We're just figuring out how to bury it properly. He left then, carrying his suitcase and a box of personal items, and I watched through the window as he loaded them into his car and drove away. The house felt different with him gone. Emptier, but also cleaner. Like something toxic had been removed. I walked through the rooms we'd shared, seeing them with new eyes. This was my space now, mine and the kids. We would build something new here, something honest. The next few weeks were simultaneously the hardest and most liberating of my life. I started my new job and threw myself into it with an intensity that surprised my new colleagues. I was good at it, I remembered. Good at leadership, good at strategy, good at building and creating. Part of me had been dormant for so long, and waking it up felt like coming back to life. The kids adjusted in fits and starts. Jack cried less as the days passed, though he still had moments of heartbreak that would hit without warning. Emma's anger slowly transformed into something more complex. Not forgiveness, but a kind of resigned acceptance. They saw Michael every other weekend, and the first few exchanges were excruciating. All of us trying to maintain civility, while emotions roared beneath the surface. Michael tried, I had to give him that. He showed up on time for pickups. He called the kids every evening he didn't have them. He sent apology letters that I didn't read, left voicemails that I deleted without listening. He wanted absolution I couldn't give, understanding I didn't have. As far as I was concerned, he'd made his choices, and now he had to live with who those choices had revealed him to be. The divorce proceedings began 2 months after our separation. California's 6-month waiting period felt interminable, but Elizabeth assured me that we were making excellent progress on the settlement. Michael's lawyer tried to argue for a share of my premarital assets, but Elizabeth shut that down quickly with documentation, showing clear separation of those funds throughout our marriage. In the end, the division was clean. He got half the joint accounts, half the equity in the house, his retirement accounts. I kept my separate investments, the rental properties, and primary custody of the kids. He'd pay child support, though given my new salary, it wasn't as much as it might have been. I didn't care. I didn't want his money. I wanted my freedom. The most unexpected part of the whole process was how many women reached out to me. Friends, acquaintances, even near strangers seemed to emerge from the woodwork, with their own stories of betrayal, of financial vulnerability, of rebuilding after loss. At a coffee meeting with former colleagues, one woman pulled me aside and whispered, "I'm so glad you protected yourself financially." I didn't, and I'm still paying for it 10 years later. Another, at a school function, squeezed my hand and said, "You're showing our daughters what strength looks like." Thank you. I hadn't intended to become some kind of symbol, but apparently I had. Angela told me that women were talking about what I'd done, how I'd secured my assets, gone back to work, refused to let betrayal destroy me. "You're kind of a legend," she said with a grin. The woman who didn't just survive divorce, the woman who planned for it. 6 months after I'd walked into Simone's apartment, the divorce was finalized. I stood in the courthouse with Elizabeth, signed papers that ended my marriage, and felt nothing really, just relief that it was over, that I could stop being in legal limbo and start fully moving forward. Michael wasn't there. He'd given his lawyer power of attorney to sign on his behalf. I heard through mutual friends that he was still with Simone, that they'd moved in together, that he was trying to play happy family with her. I wished them well, in the abstract way you wish well to strangers. Their relationship, their choices, their future. None of it was my concern anymore. Emma and Jack continued to heal, slowly finding their footing in our new reality. Emma started talking to a therapist, working through her anger and hurt. Jack became more clingy for a while, but eventually started to relax again, to laugh more freely. They both adjusted to having two homes, two sets of routines, two parents who were happier apart than they'd been together. Because that was the surprising truth. I was happier. Not right away. Those first months were brutal, full of grief and anger and fear. But gradually, as I rebuilt my life, I discovered a version of myself I'd forgotten existed. The Laura who was ambitious and creative and unapologetically herself. The Laura who didn't apologize for taking up space or having needs or making decisions that prioritized her own well-being. I dated eventually, though not seriously at first. It was enough to remember that I was attractive, interesting, worthy of attention from men who actually valued me. I had coffee with a divorced lawyer who made me laugh. I went to dinner with a widowed professor who loved books as much as I did. I even had a brief fling with a considerably younger entrepreneur who reminded me that passion and desire weren't things that died at 40. None of these turned into serious relationships, but they didn't need to. They were proof that life continued, that possibilities remained, that the end of my marriage wasn't the end of my story. A year after the divorce, I was having dinner with Angela when she brought up Michael. "Have you heard?" she asked carefully. "About him and Simone?" "No, and I don't really want to," I said, but she continued anyway. "They broke up. Apparently she found texts on his phone. He was seeing someone else. I should have felt vindicated, I suppose. Proved right. Instead, I just felt tired." "Of course he was," I said. "That's who he is." The cheating wasn't about me, or about her, or about any particular woman. It was about him, about whatever emptiness he's trying to fill by constantly seeking validation from someone new. "Are you okay?" Angela asked. "I'm fine," I said, and realized it was true. I'm genuinely fine. He's not my problem anymore. She's not my problem. The only person I'm responsible for is myself and my kids, and we're doing really well. And we were. Jack had joined the robotics club and discovered a passion for engineering. Emma was thriving in school, her confidence returning as she watched her mother build a successful career and independent life. I'd been promoted at work. I'd started training for a half marathon. I'd joined a book club and made new friends who knew me as Laura, not as Michael's wife or as half of a couple. The final piece of closure came 18 months after I'd blocked Michael's access to my accounts. I was cleaning out the garage when I found a box of old photographs, wedding pictures, honeymoon snapshots, family portraits from happier times. I sat on the garage floor going through them and felt a strange mix of emotions. That couple in the pictures looked so young, so hopeful, so convinced they'd last forever. They had no idea what was coming, and I felt a kind of gentle pity for them both. For the woman I'd been, who'd trusted so completely, and even for the man he'd been before whatever happened to change him. I didn't throw the pictures away. They were part of my history, part of my children's history, and erasing them wouldn't change what had happened. Instead, I packed them carefully in a storage box labeled "Past Lives" and put them in the back of the closet. Acknowledged but not dwelling, remembered but not defining. Emma found me sitting there, surrounded by remnants of a marriage that no longer existed. She sat down beside me, picked up a wedding photo, studied it. "You looked really happy," she said. "I was," I admitted. At that moment, I was. But people change. Circumstances change. What matters isn't that it ended, but how we move forward from the ending. Wat zou ze doen? Do you regret it? Marrying Dad, I mean? I thought about it carefully. "No," I said finally. "Because if I hadn't married him, I wouldn't have you and Jack." And you two are the best things I've ever done. Everything else, the pain, the betrayal, the divorce, all of it was worth it because I got to be your mom. Emma leaned her head on my shoulder. You're pretty amazing, you know that? I laughed. I'm really not. I'm just someone who got knocked down and decided to get back up. That's not amazing. That's just survival. No, Emma said firmly. It's more than that. You didn't just survive. You thrived. You got a job you love. You're happy. You're showing me and Jack that you don't have to stay in something that's hurting you just because it's comfortable or because you're scared. You're teaching us that we're worth fighting for. That's amazing. Maybe she was right. Maybe what I'd done, protecting myself, rebuilding my life, refusing to accept less than I deserved, maybe that was worth something. Not just for me, but for my children, who were watching and learning what it looked like to have boundaries, to value yourself, to know when to hold on and when to let go. 2 years after the divorce, Michael reached out directly for the first time. Not about the kids, not about logistics, but to talk. I almost deleted the email without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. It was long, rambling, full of apologies and explanations and requests for forgiveness. He'd been in therapy, he said. He'd been working on himself, trying to understand why he'd done what he'd done. He wanted me to know that he understood now how much he'd hurt me, how selfish he'd been. He didn't expect me to forgive him, but he hoped someday I might be able to understand. I read it twice, then closed my laptop and went for a run. By the time I came back, sweaty and exhausted and clear-headed, I knew what I wanted to say. I wrote back, keeping it brief. Michael, I appreciate you sharing where you are in your journey. Therapy is good. Self-awareness is good. Understanding the harm you caused is good. But I need you to know that I don't need your apologies anymore. I've moved past what happened between us. I don't carry anger or resentment. I barely think about it anymore. I hope you find peace. I hope you become a better man. And I hope you're a good father to our children. But I don't need closure from you. I found my own closure. I wish you well, but I don't need to be. Part of your healing process. Take care, Laura. I hit send and felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, no residual pain. Just the neutral acknowledgement that someone I used to love was trying to deal with his own demons. And that was his journey to take, not mine. The years continued to unfold. Jack and Emma grew, became teenagers with their own complicated lives, their own relationships, their own understanding of what had happened between their parents. They maintained a relationship with Michael, though it was never quite what it had been before. There was love there, but also wariness, a lesson learned about not taking people at face value. I continued building my career, eventually starting my own consulting firm that specialized in helping companies streamline their operations. The business thrived, partly because I was good at what I did, but also because I'd learned valuable lessons about protecting yourself, about maintaining your own identity even within partnerships, about the importance of having something that was entirely yours. I dated more seriously as time went on. There was Richard, the architect who designed sustainable buildings and made me feel beautiful. There was David, the high school teacher who loved hiking and introduced me to meditation. And eventually, there was Thomas, the divorced father of 3 who understood what it meant to rebuild after betrayal, who valued honesty above all else, who saw me clearly and loved what he saw. Thomas and I took it slow, both of us wary of rushing into anything, both of us protective of our children and our hard-won independence. But slowly, carefully, we built something real. Not perfect. Nothing is perfect, but honest and mutual, and based on seeing each other as complete individuals, rather than as pieces needed to make ourselves whole. 5 years after my divorce, standing in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd opened that envelope from Angela, I realized something profound. The affair, the betrayal, the divorce, all of it had felt like the end of my world at the time. And in a way, it was, but it was also the beginning of something else. The beginning of me understanding my own worth. The beginning of me reclaiming my power. The beginning of me building a life that was authentically mine, rather than a supporting role in someone else's story. Michael's affair didn't destroy me. His betrayal didn't define me. His lies didn't diminish me. In the end, his choices revealed him, not me. And what they revealed was that I was stronger than I'd ever known, more resilient than I'd imagined, more capable of reinvention than I'd believed possible. The day I blocked his access to our finances wasn't about revenge. It was about protection. It was about finally prioritizing myself after years of putting everyone else first. It was about refusing to be a victim and choosing, instead, to be a survivor and ultimately a thriver. I look at my life now, my successful business, my healthy children, my honest relationship, my circle of supportive friends, my financial security, and I feel something I didn't feel for years. During my marriage, I feel proud of who I've become, proud of how I've handled everything that was thrown at me, proud that when life knocked me down, I didn't just get up, I built myself back stronger. The envelope that arrived on that Tuesday changed everything, but not in the way Michael intended when he started his affair. It changed me from someone who accepted less than she deserved into someone who knew her worth. It changed me from someone who was afraid to be alone into someone who understood that being alone was better than being with someone who didn't truly see you. It changed me from someone who gave away her power into someone who held it close and used it wisely. Michael never saw it coming, that's true. He never anticipated that the wife he'd taken for granted would turn out to be his equal in strategy, his superior in resolve. He never imagined that blocking his access to our finances would be just the first move in a larger game he'd already lost. He never understood that you can't betray someone who's finally learned to value herself, because once that lesson is learned, the power shifts forever. And the most beautiful irony of all? In trying to escape our marriage for something he thought would make him happier, he freed me to discover a happiness I'd never known was possible. He wanted to leave, so I let him go. But I did it on my terms, with my assets protected, with my dignity intact, with my future secured. That's the thing about betrayal. Sometimes the person who walks away is the one who loses everything, while the person left behind discovers they had everything they needed all along. They just needed to believe it. So yes, after my husband left me for his lover, I blocked his access to our finances. He never saw it coming. But what he really never saw coming was that I didn't need him nearly as much as he'd assumed, that I was capable of thriving without him, that the life I built from the ashes of our marriage would be better, more authentic, more mine than anything we'd created together. They say living well is the best revenge. I'm not sure it's revenge I'm after anymore, but living well, that I've mastered. And every day that I wake up in a life I've built on my own terms, with people who value me, doing work I love, raising children who understand their worth, that's not revenge. That's victory. Not over him, but over every doubt I ever had about whether I could make it on my own. I could. I did. I am. And that's a story worth telling. That's a story worth living. That's a story that I hope inspires someone else, somewhere, who's standing in their kitchen holding evidence of betrayal, wondering if they have the strength to do what needs to be done. You do. You have more strength than you know. And sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of your real life, the one where you're the hero, not the supporting character. If this story resonated with you, if you've been inspired by Laura's journey from betrayal to empowerment, please subscribe to hear more stories about resilience, reinvention, and the quiet power that emerges when we finally choose ourselves. Share this with anyone who needs to hear that it's never too late to reclaim your life. Protect your worth and build something beautiful from broken pieces.